Sometimes when you're working on something, you get a little frustrated and you got to bring out what I call the big tool. There's always like this toolbox and you have this one tool where you're like, I'm done asking. We're just going to do it. That is the QByteArray. This is a must-have class for working with data. So at its, well, core, no pun intended because we're talking about QCore, QByteArray is pretty much the universal class for anything data related. And you'll see what I mean here in just a second. So let's say QString, which we've worked with before. Let's call this greeting, and let's go ahead and just do the obligatory hello world. I mean, we're right back at the very beginning of this tutorial. Let's say we want to do stuff with that, but you know what? QString's just obnoxious. It's a great universal string class, but we want to work with data. So I'm going to say QByteArray, and let's call this buffer. So we're working on some kind of application and we are knee deep in data and we want a buffer to work with. I'm going to say greeting dot, and from here we can say to, and when we start looking at this, like if we go to Latin 1, to local 8-bit, you notice the return type here, QByteArray, and so on and so on. Even if we say to UTF-8, we get a QByteArray. So this is extremely cool. We have QByteArray baked into even the most fundamental universal classes. So we're really getting down to the nitty-gritty here. So now that we've got our buffer, we want to try and do something with it. Well, it's actually very simple. Dot, and you notice how we have append. So let's just try it. And we have a whole bunch of things that we can append here, including other QByteArrays and QByteArray views and things of that nature. So let's just go ahead and let's append something. And let's QInfo it out, much in the manner we would a QString, or pretty much any other data type. And hello world. This is extremely cool. I mean, it's so simple to work with, and a lot of languages and frameworks and things like that working with, well, bytes is a royal pain. But this just, again, I'd love to turn this into a 4-hour lesson. It's so simple. Why bother? So I'm gonna say buffer dot, and let's go ahead and write justified this, which is going to take everything and justify it off to the right. Very, very self-explanatory. And I want to give it a special character. Now notice it's a character, so a string isn't going to work. I have to use single quotes. And we're going to do that with just a period. Let me get rid of that annoying yellow box there. And let's print that out and see what that looks like. Ta-da! It just works. I don't have to screw around with any crazy documentation or special function calls or anything like that. It just works. I love that. All right, so let's grab this thing. And let's say we want to know what's at a specific position in our buffer. So I'm going to say at. Again, very, very self-explanatory. And now we need a position. Okay, so this is a zero-based thing. So I'm going to go buffer dot length, which is going to give us the length of the buffer. But because this is zero-based, I need to -1. So it's going to give us the very last thing in the buffer. Let's go ahead, save, run, see what this looks like. Our last thing is, well, an exclamation point. Ta-da! Very cool, very easy to use. And we can also interchangeably work with other things. Let me demonstrate. So QString, our beloved QString, let's call this modified. And we're going to use the constructor of QString. And you notice there's a couple things we can do in the constructor, including use a QByteArray. This is just great. So now what I'm showing you here is you can take a string, turn it into a QByteArray, manipulate it, and then put it back into a string. And it is just awesome. I mean, it's really hard to describe unless you've had some real-world experience in other languages and other frameworks. Let's go modified. It's actually taking me longer to type it out than it is to actually understand how all this works together. But when you run this, you can see the modified version is, well, very easy. Very simple, very elegant, right down to earth, and it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. We can also do some basic encoding and decoding. Notice the words here, basic, encoding, and decoding. So this is very, very basic. And encoding and decoding is not encryption. Repeat that after me. It is not encryption. But we can say Q info buffer. And in case you are wondering how you would encrypt something, at this point in time, you really do need to use a third-party class. There are some things built into Qt, but they're more advanced than what we're talking about, and they're not what I would use as industry standard. You're going to want to use some sort of third-party library. So anyways, back to encoding and decoding. So we can take this buffer and base 64 encode it. We could also take this buffer and do a 2 hex. So if you want to see what it looks like in hex, you could see that as well. Ta-da! Very simple, very easy to use. And again, just to sound boring and repetitious, all of this is baked right into, you guessed it, the help system. Simply highlight it, press F1, and all of the documentation is right at your fingertips.